Greetings, Mr. and Mrs. Middle America and all the ships at sea. This is Ian Punnett, and to the hostile invading alien armies hovering silently above Earth and hidden behind their, I should write this down. Hidden behind their cloaking devices. Remember, eat the Canadians first. We were talked briefly last night during open lines about the Illinois sightings. Really interesting. I mean, not on the par, obviously, with some other things, but take a look. You'll find out more at coasttocoastam.com. Also, I tweeted or X'd. I don't know. Is it X'd? I X'd out. That just sounds wrong. Anyway, whatever Elon Musk is calling Twitter, Twixter? I don't know. Anyway, I put on my account at Deacon Punnett, I put a photo that somebody had asked for last night of my thumb, which has a piece of graphite buried underneath it. I think I said 25 years in the tweet. I think it's more like 35 years. I think 35 years that's been sitting underneath my skin. And then we talked a lot about what's coming up tonight, junk science in the American criminal justice system. Attorney Chris Fabricant is going to join us. He is best known, I think, maybe for many people, for the Netflix series The Innocence Files. The Innocence Project has gotten many people out of prison who should never have been there in the first place, who were not only falsely accused and convicted, but the evidence gathered against them was often done not in good faith, and just as a way of expediting an investigation so that the local police, wherever they were able to get a conviction. And the junk science that they used to do it is the subject of this new book, Junk Science and the American Criminal Justice System, that's coming up next hour. Also, we're coming up into that spooky time of year, and we're lining up some really fun guests all over the coast landscape, from the paranormal, from ghosts, from all sorts of investigations, including the type of investigations that Greg has been on. So our first guest, Greg Lawson, has been on with us before. He's also in my podcast. I will have the second series of that podcast coming up. I pulled parts of the interview from what we had done on the air, and I used it in a previous podcast. And so Greg Lawson is going to comment on the new revelation of the JFK assassination case, because I think there's a lot more to this bullet that was recently discovered, the one that's the subject of a book written by a Secret Service agent who says that he found this bullet and then he placed it on the gurney that had and that it got transferred, and it became part of the subject of the magic bullet theory that has been critiqued since the Warren Commission. And we'll get to the way that Greg is thinking about it, because he is not just a police officer. He is also the paranormal detective. He loves to take cases that other people kind of wrote off or said, there's no way that there's any truth to that, and applying modern police techniques to those investigations. And that's what we'll use to get the show started next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. If you missed it, you can use your Coast Insider, or if you subscribe, you can at least catch the first hour of Friday night's interview with JY of Styx. That was a lot of fun. And a quick update on something that had come up. One of those stories that I mentioned that I'm teasing coming up for October started with a question during open lines last night, which is, do I know of any cases of haunted recording studios? I didn't personally, but I got a bunch of very interesting messages about that, so that'll be something I think we'll revisit coming up later on this fall on Coast to Coast AM. So it's hard to encapsulate everything that Greg Lawson has done, but here, let me get if I get it right. So he has he is a police curricula designer. He's a researcher. He's an author. He is a veteran of both the U.S. Marines, the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army. He was the former commissioner of Gotham City, I believe, is on his resume. He was part of Green Lantern Corps at one point, and a detective in Metropolis who worked hand in hand with Superman. He beat Bobby Flay. He was voted sexiest man alive by People magazine in 1987. Greg, did I get it all in there?
Oh, my God. What kind of meds are you on tonight? Oh.
I'm sorry. You're right. I forgot you beat Michael Jordan in the slam dunk contest in the 1986 All-Star game.
Yeah, I confirm all that except for the Marines. Never served in the Marines. Served with a lot of Marines. Like them a lot.
Okay. Excellent. So Greg was on with us not too long ago. I went to your website, and I'm not grousing too much about it, but as I looked, you have redone your website. It looks great. No mention of your old friend Ian. I see like every possible podcast you've ever been on. I'm glad you gave Dave Schrader a shout out, but you were key, Greg, when we were talking a couple of months ago, and on the podcast that I did, Vaudeville for the Frightened, you were featured there. You might enjoy going back and hearing it.
I need to contact my people and make sure that's taken care of, because I know my close associates that I have on that back page. I believe, that needs to be updated. Sorry about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a podcast. I mean, it has the road show you did for 2 years with Andy Dick, but no mention of Ian. So I'm like, I'm feeling like, okay, what do I got to do to rate here? So you were one of my first thoughts when this story came out. I'm going to share it because I know that George had mentioned it earlier in the week, but this is some of the writing from News Nation. A former Secret Service agent who witnessed President John F. Kennedy's assassination 60 years ago is casting new doubt on the so-called magic bullet theory. Paul Landis, 88, in the car directly behind Kennedy when shots rang out in Dallas and Dealey Plaza in 1963. He claims that he found this nearly pristine bullet inside of that. It was a Lincoln Continental, wasn't it? The four-door,
right? Yeah,
right? With the suicide doors, right? Yeah. And then he took that bullet, put it in his pocket. He was afraid that it would be found by souvenir hunters or something like that. And then he dropped it on the gurney where he saw the body of President Kennedy. And then they were somehow along the way, that bullet got transferred under the gurney of Governor John Connally. And this is kind of the core of the magic bullet theory. What did you think, just even, as an investigator, as a cold case investigator, what did you think of that story when you first heard it?
So that kind of stuff doesn't surprise me. What I would do if I was investigating this, I would go straight to the witness first. I would go straight to him and kind of find out where his memory's going. There's a lot of new forensic psychology going on. Like you were talking about that piece of graphite that's in your thumb, and it seemed like it was 20 years ago, and it was actually 40 years ago.
Yeah, so it's crazy. I was in 7th grade. I don't even know where the math came from. It was weird.
Yeah, you're experiencing a little time compression there, right?
Right.
So it's kind of a natural thing that we do when we get older. Elderly recall is a little bit different if you really get off into the forensic psychology of that. But it's interesting because we kind of look at the JFK assassination from a contemporary standpoint of how to conduct an investigation. In the 1960s, they were not nearly as sophisticated as we are now. They were pretty good. I mean, they were doing bullet analysis and that sort of things in the early 1830s, 1840s. They were doing that over in London. and they could point out those types of things as far as identifying a bullet from a particular gun. And so we've gotten a lot better at that. But the whole problem with this thing, from beginning to end, is the chain of custody, right?
Right.
Where did this bullet come from? Where was it first found? There's also some information that he didn't put it on the gurney. We're talking about, he would have put it on a surgery table, one of those stainless steel tables beside the gurney, and he may have put it there. So it just kind of depends on the timeline and who is saying what. So it gets pretty confusing.
Yeah. He's 88 years old, which means that, as he refers to President Biden as freshman, that he's that old, and so you're right on the failing memory thing. What's interesting too is the timing of when he brought out this information. It's not the first time there's been, and it won't be the last time, that there are deathbed confessions that are perfectly legitimate. People don't want to go to their grave not having, reset the truth as best as they can many decades after an incident took place.
Absolutely. And when you look at how memory fades, and it fades very quickly unless it's revisited on, a routine basis. And, in some of the articles that I read about this particular book that's going to come out is
right.
that, he didn't think about this stuff. When it happened, he left the Secret Service shortly after that, and he purposely, because of PTSD and everything else, he purposely just didn't address it, didn't watch the
right.
news, didn't follow up on anything. So he kind of flushed that stuff, and no telling how long he did that, even though that's a really episodic memory, right? That's in brain. It's put in your brain based on context, time, place, and it really is solidified. But if you don't entertain those and you don't do that memory retrieval on a regular basis, things start falling apart there.
Well, and you go back to, again, 1963. There are a lot of there's a lot of, there are many different celebrations or investigations that started in the 60s, in the 70s again, after the Warren Commission. I mean, there's been a lot of, it's hard to get away from that and just go think that for all this time since 1963, here's this Secret Service guy with his finger in his ears going blah, 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 because he doesn't want to hear it, right?
Sure.
So we're talking about Paul Landis, 88, in the car directly behind Kennedy in Dealey Plaza. This will be an interesting play coming up, by the way, into Chris Fabricant's Junk Science next hour. But so ballistics notwithstanding, let's just say all things that he said that we can verify are true.
Right.
It's weird to me that he dropped the bullet on whether it's an operating table or a gurney or whatever words he was using. That's just kind of, and thinking, oh, this is where this bullet belongs, which is how he thought about it at the time. As a trained investigator, that's a key piece of evidence, and you're playing around with it like it's a pen at a crime scene or something.
Right. I would really like to know what kind of training the Secret Service gets in evidentiary procedures. I know the FBI does, but you think of he probably went through training in early 1960s, 61, 62. What kind of training, how many hours of training? And, while the Secret Service primarily, they guard the president and other key political figures, they also enforce, Treasury law, and they do a lot of
right.
Counterfeit stuff.
They do other stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. You would think that they would have some pretty solid evidentiary procedures, but you have to think also, if he did this, if his mind is serving him properly, and if he did this, the stress of it, he didn't want the bullet to get, everything was just complete chaos. There's tons of people everywhere where they shouldn't be. They're running over evidence. They're destroying evidence. Everything's going on. He's got this thing, and he knows that, they're going to be doing an autopsy and all that stuff. And he just drops it. It sounds really unusual, but I've seen people do really weird stuff. I've done, stuff that was out of character when I'm very much under stress. So, man, I don't know. I just shrug my shoulders at that. It's like
so far with facts and evidence, because I mean, it's an obscure rifle, right? So if it came from Oswald, they have the striations, they have the comparative casings or whatever it is that they had from the original Italian rifle that wasn't even considered a good weapon. No. And so he's putting that bullet up against that. Now, if it comes back, then it fits that rifle. Then you have to switch and go, well, how was it that he had that? Maybe it was something that was fired into the car and it did or didn't hit the president, or, confirms, several other theories. I think we'll go to the phones on that coming up here in just a second, so don't bother commenting on that quite yet. But here's the other piece I'm thinking about as I reflect back on it. It says here that his testimony, his book, sheds new light or challenges the magic bullet theory. I thought the magic bullet theory had kind of long since been kind of dismissed. If you look to see where Governor Connolly was actually sitting when the shot from the book depository went off.
Well, and that's the problem, right? So the Warren Commission, they stated it acted alone and supported that single bullet theory. The Rockefeller Commission, the Church Committee, they all agreed with the Warren Commission. So it wasn't until later the House Select Committee on assassination, something like that.
Right.
Yeah, they stepped up and said, no, there's no way this could have happened. It was a conspiracy. So. But it kind of ends there, right? It's like, all right, well, what else do we have?
That's all we got.
Everybody's dying. We don't have hardly any evidence. And the evidence that we have, we don't know the origin story of it. You have individuals over at the hospital saying that they saw it fall off of the gurney and they picked it up and handed it over. And then it's just, it's a mess.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, except we're coming up to the bottom of the hour, and I just want to say that's where, I don't think there's two things involved. A, does it in any way discredit the magic bullet theory? No, that had largely been discredited. But B, did it confirm other theories about how many gunmen would have been involved in this assassination, and how was it that it ended up in a pristine form behind the president's head? All things being true, how did it end up behind him if it wasn't fired from in front of him? So
yeah, and like you said, the pristine condition of it. I was a range master for our agency. I was a combat arms training and maintenance instructor. I've studied ballistics. I've shot a whole bunch. I was an augment sniper for our SWAT team. That bullet didn't go through all that clothes and those, that inches of flesh and clothing
bone
and everything else. It didn't.
Yeah. But I mean, hitting the rib, then hitting the wrist. Yeah. I mean, it might have gone through just purely soft tissue, but as soon as it can't be that good. But right away, you have your Gerald Posners of the world that have come out and said, see, this doesn't make any sense, and here's why. And they start again with this kind of reductive logic. They start with this conclusion, and then everything that they do from that point on backs that up. So let's put that just on hold for the second. Remind you that junk science and the American criminal justice system may or may not address something like this coming up next hour, but it is both a great Netflix series and then the new book from Chris Fabricant. And then we'll give you the numbers so that you can join the conversation, too, because we know so many people are following it. And we're coming up on yet another anniversary on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett. So lots to get to tonight on Coast to Coast, junk science and the American criminal justice system coming up next hour. Highly recommended book, by the way. I mean, really great blurbs. And Chris Fabricant deserves them for what they've been doing with the Innocence Project. But it isn't just the Innocence Project that's being debated here. It's what they're up against if prosecutors and police investigators just make up stuff. You know, it fits a theory. It looks good in front of a jury, but is it legit? And that's what we're talking about coming up next hour. Also, getting back with Greg Larson, this is his reflection on the bullet that was just found that was discussed openly this week after having been found after the assassination of JFK by Paul Landis, who was at the time a fairly young Secret Service agent, given that detail protecting the president, left the Secret Service not long later and has been holding on to this for all of these years. Wanted to get it off his chest before he died. And so where are you with that? And we'll get more from Greg next, too. On Coast to Coast AM, this is Ian Punnett. In many ways, the whole nation has been following this story for 50 years. The assassination of JFK. And so many people are invested in one theory or another, or they have a short list of the usual suspects. We'll get to your calls for Greg Larson coming up in just a second. If you go online, you can link up to him, and you can find out more, too, about his work. Wildcard line, Robert is in New York for Greg. Go ahead, Robert.
Yes, gentlemen. It's a pleasure to speak to both of you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
I can hear you fine. Yeah, but we're good.
Okay. Well, as a researcher and investigator, I can say this. My godfather, who was a physicist, a scientist, professor of physics and so forth, said that the laws of physics do not afford, a single bullet that goes in many different directions, and which the single bullet theory was instituted. And there was an attorney assigned to the case through the Warren Commission report. The name is Arlen Specter from Pennsylvania.
Sure, we know all this, but tell me about this, and I appreciate that. But I mean, I think the magic bullet theory isn't even on the table when we're talking about this. I don't think it. I think what we're really talking about is the physics, if you will, of another shooter. I mean, yeah, Arlen Specter, Warren Commission, yeah, we're down with that. I don't think this informs the magic bullet theory one way or another. Do you?
Well, the laws of physics
Robert?
don't provide for this. Yes, the laws of physics just don't provide for this. And Arlen Specter told the Warren
what?
Commission
No. Right, wait, Robert. For what? We know it doesn't. Let's move on past that. We know there is. Okay.
Okay. So have you ever investigated the police officer that retired who was there at the Dallas morgue who actually had on his chest and wanted to express himself because of something he's hidden all these years? He stated clearly that he had visitors from 2 CIA agents that came in with a gun in a case, and they asked for where Oswald's body was, and he told them the exact number, and it took out the tray. And I believe Oswald was put in opposite of which the other cadavers were put.
Okay.
And they literally put the gun to his fingers to put fingerprints on a gun that they brought in, and they put it back in the case, and they told this police officer, you did see nothing. Remember, you saw nothing.
Okay, well, let's get we've got Greg right here, so let's ask him that question. What do you know about that story?
I haven't. I've heard these kind of stories that have come out. It's real hard to corroborate any of that for the simple fact we don't know what the motivations of people are. We've had cases that 40 or 50 people come forward and say, I'm the one that did that. And it just kind of makes you wonder why folks are admitting to certain things, whether they're they have mental illness or they're just trying to be a part of something. It makes you wonder.
Well, but let's look at this again as an investigator. It wouldn't be this very least likely that it was the CIA that came in. Now, it could have been somebody posing as the CIA, but.
Yeah, I would be a little bit suspicious in the fact that they let him stay in the room and watch that. I would say, you need to step out of the room.
Right.
Or
if you're going to say, we're going to fabricate evidence here, watch us do it. Yeah. That's not. Yeah. Okay. Bob is in Charleston, Indiana, on Coast to Coast for Greg Lawson. The story we're talking about is we're kind of past the magic bullet thing and talking about, well, what does this, if all things are true, what does this bullet found behind the president's head actually tell us? But, Bob, you have a question for Greg?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment, sir, Ian.
Yeah.
There was no bullet that hit JFK in the neck. It hit him in the front of the throat. One hit him, obviously, in the front of the head. One hit him 5 inches below the collarbone, just to the right of the spine. And Gerald Ford, with his creativity, changed the testimony from the bullet in the back to the bullet in the back of the neck. That was the only way they could get the bullet, to exist. It was just his creativity, and then
let's get Greg Lawson on this. So, Greg, you hear that, and what's your thought?
Well, here's the real problem: is when the Warren Commission took all that evidence. One of the things that they excluded were any of the X-rays or photos of the body. And everybody, I'm sure, that hasn't heard this before is like, what? Well, it was kind of like HIPAA. They were going to be above board. The Warren Commission was going to release all of their information, all of their findings. They felt that it was intrusive to show the condition of the president's body and the pictures of the body, because then that would be discoverable for those that would ask for, what would we know now as an open records kind of thing. So, you can tell me what his body looked like if you want to. I don't know whether I believe that or not, just for the simple fact that, I haven't been able to examine those types of wounds and injuries. We're only going off of memos and reports that have been written, and it's hard to make that conclusive decision without actually taking a look at the evidence.
And is it still 2030 when they're going to completely open up the file, or has that changed?
You got me. I don't know what they're...
they've been sliding that around. They have. They've been sliding that around, and I don't know what the current... First-time caller line, Russ, is also in Indiana on Coast to Coast for Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective. Go ahead, Russ.
Hi, Ian. Bit of information. I was a student at Purdue University in my dormitory when I first heard about the assassination of JFK, which was quite startling. But here we are, more than 60 years later, we're still talking about it. But something that might be of interest, have you heard of Jesse Duplantis?
I haven't. Tell me about Jesse.
He's an evangelist out of Louisiana, and he's written a book called Heaven, Close Encounters of the God Kind. And he claims, this was in 1988, he claims he was translated to heaven and he saw JFK up there. So your listeners might be interested in checking that out. In fact, he's going to have a program tomorrow, Sunday at 7 a.m. Eastern on the Daystar Network.
It seems to me like you're a true believer. So there's no way to verify that, right? I mean, he claims this, and he could repeat exactly what you said right there in more flowery language and sound very convincing. But it doesn't really pertain to the bullet, and that's really kind of the subject is this particular bullet, it would seemingly indicate that would be physical proof of another shooter. For that bullet to be found behind JFK is really the story. It's not the magic bullet theory. It's suddenly this bullet that is pristine that was kind of not even lodged. It was wasn't it right, Greg? It's just kind of laying there behind where the president was.
Right, and this lends the whole conspiracy theory thing. How easy would it be to track an individual, Lee Harvey Oswald, who was a defector and worked in the Soviet Union for a couple of years and then came back and was repatriated? How easy would it be to track that person? And I'm going to answer that very easily. You're looking at his behavior. You're looking at his involvement with these other organizations, communist organizations, and others. And if you wanted to set somebody up, there's no better person than to set somebody up than this. And as far as I'm concerned, if they're trying to do that, and you have his rifle, or you have a rifle that you give to him, or you have the rifle that he used, however he got that, to be able to go ahead and test fire that into some water or some gelatin, even water would damage the bullet, and capture that and use it as a piece of direct evidence that this bullet came from this man's rifle. So I can have an affirmative connection to him with direct evidence. And so I just take that bullet and toss it into the back of the car, or I toss it onto a gurney, or I toss it onto an equipment table, surgery table, just to create that affirmative connection between them. Be very, very simple. It's almost, it's like a fingerprint or like a DNA match to hook somebody into that. It's their gun. It's those striations from their bore of their gun. So, yeah, it would be something really probably pretty easy to set up and to implement.
And I think that's really what we're coming down to is this moves the whole argument forward.
It does.
And now that we have new physical evidence, theoretically, what does that physical evidence tell us? And do we bother, which is what seemed like a lot of the critics of this story are doing, is they immediately go ad hominem. Oh, he's 88 years old. Oh, right. Nothing about this is believable. Oh, he seems like a crackpot. Any of those things, that's where I think, well, it still doesn't address the issue of a bullet being found behind JFK. And even if he's confused, as we're postulating, on where he placed that bullet in the hospital, it was picked up off the floor, it was put back on a gurney. That's not the weirdest way that evidence has been handled after a crime scene.
No, and it still doesn't explain. Let's say it fell out of John Connolly's clothing. Still, that bullet traveled very fast, impacted 15 layers of clothing, went in and out of 7 layers of skin, through 15 inches of muscle, through a rib, through a wrist bone, and ends up on a gurney in Parkland Memorial Hospital.
Right.
Looks the way it is. That thing should be beat all to pieces.
Right. Or, and I don't even, but now other people say, like Gerald Posner, who I saw on TV today, say, no, it's been proven many times over and over again that you can fire that bullet and there's no damage to it, even given the circumstances as they supposedly existed on Dealey Plaza. And I hadn't heard that was definitive. Have you heard that that's definitive?
I have not either. That gun is considered a medium bore rifle. And what I used to shoot was a 308, which is a medium bore. My bullet was a 168 grain bullet. The bullet we're talking about with JFK is a 162 grain bullet. So it's not much difference.
Right.
The design of it is a little bit different. Mine was designed different. And yes, the bullet that was shot, it was a heavier, much poorly designed bullet. So it wasn't designed to come apart yet. I don't know whether they've layered up that much meat and that much bone and that much clothing. Right. They might have shot it into gelatin. They might have shot it. I'd like to see the recreation on that.
I would too.
Articles on it, but it's.
Yeah, well, I mean, especially if we actually have what we have now, too. So, all right, last one comes from Carson, California. This is Carlos for Greg Lawson, the paranormal detective. Go ahead, Carlos.
Yes, good evening. Question for Mr. Lawson. I think this magic bullet thing is a distraction from the real culprits.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's buying into that right now. Yeah.
Then President Kennedy was going to conduct inspections on the Dimona nuclear power plant in Israel.
I don't know anything about that. I hadn't heard anything about
yes,
that
he
as being a
actually wrote letters
factor.
to Ben Gurion of Israel saying, we're going to inspect your nuclear power plants just to make sure you're not building nuclear weapons. That is the core of the Kennedy assassination, the state of Israel, just like 9/11. Okay?
No. Now you're being anti-Semitic. Now you're just following along those old racist tropes. That everything's the Jews or something. No, dude, come on. Let's do better than that. Let's think higher than that. Let's think more critically of that, especially given that we have new evidence. Let's not just get stuck on that, because that's ridiculous to think that those things are even linked. But we'll leave that there for now. So Greg, I mean, here's the thing. We've got November coming up, and the book isn't out yet. So I would, if you're interested, I'd love to see you read what more is actually in the book. I don't think we'll get Paul Landis to stay up this late at 88. We might.
Oh man, come on.
We might. Well, no, we might. But
you would.
Well, wanting to and able to are kind of always two different things, right? Yeah. So, I mean, he could be on the East Coast and it's super late, but maybe he will. But either way, what I would love is if you get a chance to read any of it, to absorb it, to do what you do with other cases as a cold case investigator, and to kind of give it that critical eye that you have.
I will definitely end up reading it for sure.
Okay. All right. Because I'd like to continue that conversation with you. You're always fun.
I'm just glad I was able to answer everybody's questions tonight.
Yeah. Well, or the ones that can be.
This whole subject is so fraught with different ideas. And I mean, there was a whole lot of stuff going on. A lot of stuff in Central America, a lot of stuff in Cuba, a lot of stuff in the CIA. Sure. I mean, the arrows are pointing everywhere. Kill Kennedy and things will be better for these.
And I get, and maybe they're all true, and maybe 9 out of the 10 of them that weren't involved go, whoa, that was fortuitous, but it still doesn't explain the bullet. And that's what we'll come back to at some point, that new story. All right, so junk science and the American criminal justice system. We're going to start talking about teeth next on Coast to Coast AM. This is Ian Punnett.